Hi there, I'm Brian for the Lincolnwood Library, here to talk to you about Microsoft Excel. We've covered basic and intermediate Microsoft Excel use in earlier classes. In this third Excel class, we get more specific. Today, everything we'll cover has to do with manipulating, managing, and using data. We'll do some quick formatting of duplicates and text, create sparklines, insert and use filters, create charts, work with formal tables, and do conditional formatting. We'll make a pivot table and chart with example data. And we'll introduce you to VLookup and HLookup for finding data in large tables. Let's get started. In the description of this video, we will have a link to the spreadsheet that we are teaching the class from. So you'll want to download that to somewhere you can find it on your computer, maybe the downloads or your desktop or your documents before we start. When you're ready, open up the Lincolnwood Library Excel Data Class spreadsheet by double-clicking it. And it opened up. You may, toward the top of your screen, get a box asking you to trust the Excel file to enable it, a yellow bar. You just want to press the Enable button to make the spreadsheet useful, ready to be edited. Once you've done that, the first tab should open. We're going to remove duplicates first. But before that, just a little overview. Each of our different sections have their own worksheet within this Excel workbook. Remove duplicates, text to column, sparks. We'll work in our large data set, hiding data, charts, tables, use similar layouts, conditional formatting, working in a pivot table, VLookup, HLookup, drop-down lists, and then at the end, if I press this over arrow, we have one extra pivot table practice that you can use. I'll use the back arrow and go to remove duplicates. Now you can click the Lincolnwood Library logo in any of the worksheet tabs to go to the library website if you're looking for anything else. I'm back in remove duplicates, and in this example given to me by a businessman I worked with at the library, we have a whole bunch of shipping companies, and there are duplicates. I don't want to manually remove the duplicates, and you might imagine situations where there are much longer lists. To remove duplicates, we can highlight all of the values, click and hold and drag, select all of them, then go to the Data tab, and there's a nice big Remove Duplicates button in the Data Tools group. Click Remove Duplicates. Check that it has analyzed the data correctly. It recognizes we have a column label at the top and calls the column that label. So it's ready to go. I'll press OK. And you see, just like that, it removed the duplicate values and found the unique values. If you have massive data sets, this can be very helpful if you need to just find the unique items. From remove duplicates, let's go to text to columns for our next exercise. Oftentimes, data is formatted like this, maybe a last name, comma, a first name, when you really want it to be something like this, where it is split into different columns instead of these entries are all within column A. So we can show you how to split these up in case you ever run into this kind of problem. We can highlight all of the data. Then in the Data tab, in that same Data Tools menu, hit Text to Columns. A Convert Text to Columns menu appears, and it has a couple steps. First, it asks us how the data works. If it is delimited, which means that it has a comma or a tab between the fields of data, or if it's fixed width, if the data is only maybe 5 characters long and then the next entry starts after that. Ours is delimited, so make sure that is selected, then go to next. Then we have to tell it what that delimiter is. It selects tab by default. You can switch it to comma. And you see the preview down beneath. When it has this line and actually splits the data up, then it will work. So then I go to next, and then this is just some formatting options. It makes sure that the data is going to go into the right place with the right format. Then you can hit finish, and there you go, it split it up. You've got the last names in column A and the first names in column B. Could be very helpful if you have bad data. A lot of times Excel is used to help format database outputs that really were not correct for what you're doing, and this is another tool that can help you do that. Let's switch from text to columns to Sparks for our next example. We'll talk more about charts later. There is a mini kind of chart called a sparkline, which takes data that is usually going left and right like this and makes a mini chart of it in one cell, usually to the side of that cell. So if I highlight this data, the sales numbers of a hypothetical product, Lincolnwood 01, from these months, I can go to the Insert tab, and under Sparklines, there are multiple different types. I will just do the line type to start. It pulls up a Create Sparklines menu. It highlights that data range, and it asks me where I want the sparkline to actually be placed. And this is a good example. Anytime in Excel you see this funny button, which looks like kind of a little red arrow pointing to a specific cell, that means that Excel is expecting you to enter in the text field to the left of that a specific cell or a range of cells. If you type or if you click things in the wrong order, Excel can be very fussy in this regard. The easiest way to manage this is to press this button, press the cell that you need, in our case, cell H4, press this little down arrow button it becomes, and then press OK. So there you go. It created that little spark line mini chart. These are often used as kind of on-the-fly trackers for continuing data sets. Now, if I click on this sparkline, we get one of these contextual tabs that only appears when you need it. And you can use this to customize and change the spark line. Now, before I do that, obviously I don't want to do that process for all of these products. I can click on the cell, and then from its tiny dot fill handle in the lower right corner, I can hover my mouse over that, and when I get the black plus sign, the very small black plus sign, I can click and hold and drag and then move that down. And just like that, when I release, it figures out that I want the rest of these to be sparklines corresponding to the data to the left. So sparklines are nice and powerful, and they visually represent data right next to the data. So I could switch the type. Maybe instead of the spark line, I want the spark column. Or you might want win-loss, which kind of just says either up or down. You can click into the spark lines and go back, maybe say to column. Now you can do different formatting things. Maybe I want the high point to be highlighted and the low point. Any negative points, the first point and last point. But too many of these might make the data hard to evaluate, so I'll just do the high point. Under Style, you can choose between different styles. There are different monochrome and multicolor styles. Those are up to you. You can also edit them manually with the sparkline color and marker colors of specific markers. Now, if you need to remove spark lines, you can go to Clear, and selected spark line will clear just that one spark line. If you clear the spark line group, it will get rid of all of the spark lines that are detected next to each other. So if you have data that you want to glance at on the fly with a simple mini chart, you can make a spark line right next to that data. From Sparks, let's go to the large data set to practice filters. Filters are included in tables and pivot tables, but you can also quickly add them to tabular data, like in this spreadsheet. This is old Illinois census data, and if you scroll down, you see it's very large, both vertically and horizontally. So to use it, we'll probably want to do some filtering. Filters are only done from columns down. You can't do them from rows sideways. So we have these column headers that the Census Bureau put in for this data set: geocode, zip code, total population, etc. We need to select this row, and to do that we press on the row label, the number 4 over here to the left, and that highlights the whole row as I see when I scroll over. Then in the data menu under sort and filter, there is a filter button. And it doesn't look like it does much. It adds these little drop down arrows in each of those cells in row 4, which we can click on and see options and buttons and controls for narrowing down the data based on that column. So as an example, we can use zip code. Although if you want to pause this video for a minute by clicking or hitting the space bar, I encourage you to explore some of these menus. Go through, take a look through, see what the different buttons are, so you can start to learn more about filtering. But as a basic filter that we can do, I like to use zip code. So we can click on that drop down arrow there. And at the bottom here, we can select certain items from the data. Now, if we scroll up and down, we see that there is a lot of data here. The first thing we often do is unclick this select all. So now none of these are selected. The checkboxes are blank. I can use search rather than having to kind of scroll very accurately and hunt through this. Say I want to do Lincolnwood's zip code, which is 60712. I can search and make sure that that is checked. So I press OK, and then you see that it has only narrowed the filtering down to only the data from Lincolnwood. On the left, you can see that the row numbers are different. It eliminates the unnecessary rows, highlights the rows that are displayed in the filter in light blue. So we skip from row 4 to row 325 and then to row 1378. Now you see also that the filter icon is different. The filters that are not used just have this same drop-down arrow icon. The filter that is used has a little filter in its button. So I can hover over the filter to see what it is doing. Now, you can also select more than one cell. You might be able to do a whole bunch, or you might need a whole bunch depending on what you are doing. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of a blank search and see what cells I want to add. That's too many. So I can add this many more to the filtering. And I've got a good data set. Now you may need to clear a filter. I accidentally removed Lincolnwood, so I want to start over. To clear a filter, you click on the filter and then clear filter from, and it will say the label from the top of the column. So now we're back to all of the data. Let's practice again. Zip code. I can go to search. After I unselect all, search 60712. Make sure it's checked. OK. Same thing again. Now what I did wrong last time, I should have checked Add Current Selection to Filter, so that won't get rid of 60712. Sure enough, Lincolnwood stays in the filter. So we can narrow down our data really quickly. We'll be able to compare or make a chart. We can just see the raw data, scroll left and right. This is much more manageable than the gigantic tall data set that it was before filtering. All right, so from large data set, let's move over to hiding data for our next brief example. We're going to cover charts in a second, but before we do that, I want to modify this data to hide some of it, to make it easier to make the chart that we're going to do. And to do that, I want to hide columns C through E. Now, oftentimes you've got a formula in a column that's just a helper, or you've got data that is not needed for a certain task, but you might need it later. You don't want to delete it, but you don't want it to be shown in the spreadsheet, and you don't want to have to maneuver around it when selecting things. You can hide data in your spreadsheet. You can hide rows, or you can hide columns. In this example, we're going to do columns. For example, if I need to hide row 2, I can select it by pressing the row label 2 on the left side, right-click, and then hide. You see the labels now skip from 1 to 3. If I need to bring row 2 back, you see there's this little divider between 1 and 3. I can right-click on that and unhide, and that brings the row back. Now, for our example, I need to do this for columns C through E. So on the column labels at the top, directly on top of the letter C, I click and hold and drag to select columns C through E. Then I can right-click and hide. And those 3 columns are gone now. So we are ready to make our chart. All right, let's go from the Hiding Data tab to the Charts tab. So we have our data the way we want it. We hid columns C through E, and now we have zip code next to some data that we can graph in a chart. So to do this, you have to tell Excel what data you want first. So we can highlight from zip code down through all of these zip codes we selected, and then over, we're going to use these age ranges. So once you've highlighted what you want, you go to Insert, and then there is a Charts menu. And we can use different types of charts. For this, we're going to use a column or bar chart. And there are multiple different types. We'll just use this first one. And there you go. You see it understands the data. If you need to move the chart, you just wait until you get this icon with the mouse and the 4 arrows pointing away, and then you click and drag. I'll just drag it over here for now. Excel highlights the data to show you how it is interpreting things, and it uses it appropriately. So we have the zip codes on purple over here on the bottom, and it groups together all of the different age ranges, and it puts those age ranges in different colors. So once you have clicked on your chart, you get 2 contextual menus of chart tools, Design and Format. Format is just playing around with how it looks. You can do a lot with charts. In terms of that, you can go to the current selection and pick which part of the chart to be formatting. If you go into Design, you can change the colors quickly and use default pre-made styles, which do a ton of formatting for you. And you can change the chart type. This is often something that you need to do. You might click on the wrong button or change your mind. You can go to Change Chart Type, and then it pulls up all of your different charts in different categories. Now, your data will make a lot of these not relevant, but I just wanted to click through. You can change to bar. That's just kind of on the other side, basically. But for a column chart, you might want to stack it. So you can click to that. OK. And I think this looks a little better for our data. Now, you can change the size of your chart just by dragging any of the 8 dots around the edge. And again, you can move the chart just by getting this 4 arrows pointing away from your mouse button and drag it down. Now you can change the title by clicking into it, double click, and we'll call this Zip Code Verse Age Group. If I can type correctly. There we go. So that's how you can make a chart. Now, we're going to make a different chart as another example. So if I click on this chart, I just want to delete it. And to do that, I can either hit my backspace or delete key on my keyboard. I will use delete. There we go. Now, by hiding columns C through E, we made our data next to each other. There will be certain situations where you're unable or just you don't want to hide data, but you still need to put in one chart pieces of data that are not next to each other. For example, you might need zip codes as your key, and then maybe you want to do median age. We can use the ability to select data that is not next to each other to tell Excel what we want in a chart. So we're going to use zip code again, and on a PC, to select a different area that is not next to something you've already selected, you hold the Control key after making your first selection, and then I will use median age. And then, again, holding that Control key, you click and drag down. So you see these are highlighted, they're not next to each other. On a Mac, you'll just hold the Command key instead of Control. So we go again to Insert, and we can pick our different chart. I'll go to Recommended Chart. Sometimes you need a little help to find your chart. Go to All Charts, since there aren't really very good recommendations here. And I'll use the clustered column, which is correct in this case. So it figured out even the title based on the label above the data. It grabbed the actual data, and the labels beneath grabbed from the zip code. You can have multiple charts, so I am just going to drag this down and off to the side before we practice making one more chart. So for the next one, we're going to use the same strategy. We'll do zip code first, and then you can either use male 18 years and older or female 18 years and older. Hold your Control key, click and drag, and then again Insert, and then we'll do a chart that is a column or bar chart. And there we go. So again, it can figure out the title, it accurately does the scale, and it puts in our variables. One final chart, and for this last one, I actually want all of the data. So under zip code, we can click the filter and clear filter from zip code. Now we can use median age again, except now we have a ton, so we can just highlight the entire column by pressing on column S. And then Insert. This is a scatter chart. There's a ton of data. So we'll go to Scatter, and there we go. Now there is some bad data. There's some zip codes that apparently don't have any population that are included in this data. You could clear those out. If you want, you would go into Select Data, and you can figure from there. But there are a variety of types of charts. We've done some columns and a scatter. Here there are pie charts and all sorts of different charts. You can experiment with charts. You can always simply delete a chart and start over again if it gives you trouble. All right, from the Charts tab, let's go to Tables. Now this is a real-world data set. This is a report on the Lincolnwood Library video game collection from a couple years ago. And it's all nice and together, but it's not formatted. It doesn't have any tools to really help me to work with it. And to do that, we can insert a table. In the Insert menu, you see there's a Table menu. We'll get to pivot tables later, but there is the simple Table, which still is very helpful. To insert a table like that, all you have to do is just click anywhere into the data. As long as all the data is together, this will work. You click anywhere into the data, go into this Insert menu again, and press Table. Pulls up a little menu about creating your table. Important thing here, you want to make sure if you have labels at the top of your columns, make sure that My Table Has Headers is clicked. So I will click that, OK, and there we go. So you see it formats the headers a little different. It alternates colors, and it gives me the filters, which are very helpful. It also enables some advanced features that we will cover in the Level 4 class about creating advanced formulas. But it's a great way both to do formatting and to automatically enable your filters. And you don't have extra filters off to the side as well. From the Tables tab, let's go to Conditional Formatting. And you see we're starting with the same setup with the Lincolnwood Library video game collection data and the table set up. Now again, the table has these filters with all sorts of controls. You can go A to Z or Z to A. You can eliminate certain data. You can organize by smallest to largest, largest to smallest. You have a ton of tools available in the filters. Again, to clear filters, you just click on the filter Clear, and you're back to square one. Now, you might want to, instead of just removing data, you might want to keep the data, but format it differently. You can scroll through the data and just visually see which video games are checked out. Now you can kind of see it, the text is longer, but it doesn't really pop out very well. And we can use conditional formatting to accomplish this. To do this, we go to the Home tab. Then we highlight a row or a column or an area. In this case, we're going to use the columns. I'll do column D. And then you see in the Styles menu, there's a full menu for conditional formatting. So I'll click that. And we're going to cover several examples in here. You can highlight cells rules with certain text, or less than or greater than a number, between certain numbers, equal to a certain number, a date. There are all sorts of great automatic conditional formats in here. You can do the top 10% of values or bottom, etc. We'll go over data bars. You can manage your own. And of course, you can clear out rules. But for this, in column D, we're going to go to highlight cells rules and then text that contains. This is one of the most frequent uses of conditional formatting. So it's now asking me what text I want to highlight. So you need to know your data, and I will say checked out. I want to highlight the video games in the collection that are checked out. And it has automatic formatting options. Now you can override with a custom format that you'll have to define, but a lot of people use these default options. And when video games are checked out, that's good. People are having fun with them at home. So I will use the green fill with dark green text and hit OK. So now we can scroll through and see which video games are checked out just by looking for the green. It's very eye-catching, and it's really easy to figure out how the video game collection is doing at a glance. Now, there's all sorts of other conditional formatting we can do. Let's highlight column G, go back to conditional formatting. So this is how many times the video games have been checked out over their entire lifetime. This is a good example of something you would use for a data bar. And there are all sorts of different options for the fill. You can hover over them to see what they'll look like. And I kind of like this first one, solid fill. It's kind of a medium blue. I click that, and you see now it's glanceable which video games are popular. A Wii game here that's very popular. Another Wii game. All sorts of different games, but I'm really noticing all the Wii ones. So you can scroll through and see what is popular. Here's one, another Wii one, Mario Kart. That's a great game. So you can glance through it when you're in a different sort. But of course you can also sort your conditionally formatted data. So I'll do largest to smallest in the column G checkouts filter. So that Mario Kart is actually our most popular game of all time. And a lot of Wii games are popular. Xbox One. I'm just looking for the most popular PlayStation game. Here we go. So you can really quickly find things about your data with a combination of conditional formatting and sorting. In column H, we'll highlight that, go to conditional formatting, and you can do a color scale. These are the years. Older video games are more likely to be checked out than newer video games. So I want to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the newer video games. I can hover over these different color scales options, and I want one that's going to make the older video games kind of less highlighted. So something like this. Can click that, and then I've got the newer games in green. I can sort by publication year. I'll do largest to smallest to put the new ones at the top, and we can see which of the newer games are most popular. So that's an overview of conditional formatting. You highlight your column or any area or a row, go to conditional format, and select your options. Maybe I want to do a highlight cells rule, text that contains. I'll do false for this, if I can spell, and I'll use that light red with dark text. And these are ones that I need to do some work to change in our system, so I will get to that. So conditional formatting is really powerful if you've got large data sets that you need to glance at to see how everything is going. From conditional formatting, let's move to the Pivot Table tab. Pivot tables are often something that kind of scares a lot of people about Excel. Most people who are at least a little bit knowledgeable about Excel have heard about pivot tables but may not know how to use them. The term pivot table I think of in terms of like a basketball analogy. Players can pivot on their feet without dribbling, and you can rotate really quickly, gain a good position. It's the same thing in Excel pivot tables. The pivot table, once you've got it set up, enables you to really quickly create different tables and charts about your data. You can slice and dice on the fly without worrying about actually modifying your data. So it requires you to have your data set, and it's always best to have your own data. I've made this example of the rocket company SpaceX, their launches from 2010 to 2020. It's a good data set. There are a fair number of them, but it's not overwhelming. There's about 108 launches. So to set up the pivot table, you first kind of have to make a table, just like with our conditional format and table examples. The data needs to be all next to each other, contiguous. You click anywhere in the data, go to Insert,
And under Tables, you can click Pivot Table. Now it pulls up a pivot table menu, creating a pivot table. It has figured out the extent of the data from A7 all the way down to N109. That's correct. But the really important thing about this menu is this part down here. It's asking you where the pivot table is going to be placed. You always want to put it in a new worksheet. That eliminates any risk to your original data. It makes a copy of your data so that there's no risk if you have trouble with the pivot table, you screw something up. There's no risk. You can always just delete the pivot table worksheet and go back to your original data. So I've made sure that new worksheet is selected, and I hit OK. It creates that new sheet. It put it before the pivot table, and it started to make our pivot table. Now, as soon as it entered here, you see that it gave us one of these contextual menus with Analyze and Design for the pivot table. Now we have to still actually make this pivot table. On the right side appears a panel menu, Pivot Table Fields. So it grabs the fields from the labels at the top of the table. Go back here to the pivot table, and what you have to do is drag these labels into these 4 quadrants down beneath. You've got filters, columns, the rows of the pivot table, and then between the columns and the rows, the values that are put in there. Values is kind of tricky. Your values, the column label that you drag into values, needs to be something that can be counted. So it's really not best to put a year, month, or day in there. You need something that can be counted. Unfortunately, you just kind of have to experiment to learn how this works. You can drag something in to a different area, and you can always just move it and see what it does. It makes the table for you on the fly based on its understanding of your data. Now sometimes you may wind up with something super long, and you might need to start over. To remove a value from your pivot, you just drag it back up into the listing at the top. So maybe I want to look at where SpaceX is launching from. I've got the year in the rows. That looks pretty good. And I can do launch site in the columns. They have 1, 2, 3 launch pads. Now, I still need something that can be counted. So maybe I'll try launch. And you see when I inserted launch, it automatically changed it to a count of launch. If we go back to the original data, the launch is just like the name of the payload. So it figured out that those can be counted, and all of a sudden we've got a pretty decent table. Now from the table, in the Pivot Table Analyze menu, you can go to Pivot Chart, and it pulls up your menu for doing a nice chart. Start with this clustered column, and there we go. It inserted that for me. Now, since it's using the pivot table, the chart is even more powerful than a normal chart. You have these on-the-fly options that you can work with inside the chart. So maybe I only want to look at from 2017 on. I can go into this year filter, unselect all, 2017, 18, 19, and 20. Then hit OK. It automatically redoes the chart and the table, so I can see where SpaceX has been launching from over the last 4 years. Now I can click into this filter and clear the filter. You can use the other filter as well. Maybe I only want to see the launches from Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center. You can click that, OK, and it removed the California launch site, Vandenberg, from both the table and the chart. Now you can remove the pivot chart by hitting just your delete key when you have clicked on it. Now sometimes you may have this happen where the pivot table controls disappear. If you click out of the pivot table, that's when those controls disappear. So if you just click back in, the control menu reappears. Now I've prepared some examples so we can look at the pivot table in more detail. We can see what it's possible of. So maybe I want to analyze just the specific deliveries that SpaceX has made. So we can put the year into the rows, just like before. We can put the launches into the values. And then we could make this a simple line chart. We can see over time how SpaceX has been able to do. So pivot chart, line chart. Okay, so you see they had a little decline in 2019, but in 2020 they are up quite a bit. Delete this chart. Another example. We'll first clear out the pivots. Maybe I want to analyze where the cargoes were delivered in space. I can use, and I want to clear this filter first. Maybe I want to put payload orbit into the rows, and again, launches into the values. So we can see really quickly that most of the payloads are going really high up to geosynchronous orbit, and the others are going basically to low Earth orbit, like the International Space Station. Now I can analyze the specific types of vehicles that were used. I can put year into the rows. And if I do vehicle, you can have multiple of these values into one of these quadrants. And then I can also put vehicle into the values. So you can put one variable into your chart multiple times. Now you see when you have more than one value in one of these quadrants, it kind of groups them together. So I could collapse it by pressing the minus button on each of these. So it just gives me a summary. But if I want to see the specific of a certain year, I can see that they started to reuse some in 2017. They hadn't in 2016 yet. So you can really quickly see kind of multiple pieces of data with this kind of stacked pivot. We can analyze the country of the customers. So customer country, put into the rows, and launches will put into the values. And you can see that most of the customers are from the United States, but there is a good amount of customers from outside of the USA. And this is going to be a pie chart. So under Analyze, I can go to Pivot Table, and then pick a pie chart. And you see that the US is most of the customer base. Now you could filter specific countries out, or if you just wanted to delete the chart and move on. Again, you click the chart and delete. Now again, if those controls disappear, you just click into the chart. I want to just do two more. I want to analyze their landings and their success. So for landings, I want to do the landing outcome somewhere in here. Here it is. Put that in the columns. Then again, the year in the rows, and launches as our countable data. Then if I make a chart of this, this is a good stacked column. So you can see what happened in their recycling attempts over time. They had failures at the beginning. They didn't even try a lot of the time. They started to be successful, and they had fewer failures. Now again, you could filter this. Maybe I only want to look at the failures. And I'll hit OK. And you can see that they did have a failure in they actually have had 2 failures in 2020, but the numbers have declined since the peak in 2016. I'll clear that filter before I move on. Click the filter, clear filter, and then I will delete the chart. Last one I want to do. So I'll take a look at reusability and their success. So in our filter, I will do the landing outcome. I'll do the mission outcome in the rows. And usually I've been using the count of launch, but I'm going to do the count of customers. And there we go. It generates this data. Now we can take a look at how many customers have had failures versus how many have had successes. But we can filter all of this based on a certain parameter. So maybe I want to look at the landing outcome and compare that to the mission outcome. The mission refers to if the thing was actually delivered to the right orbit in space. The landing outcome refers to if they were able to reuse any part of the rocket. So I want to look at the failures of the recycling attempts. And all of those times that the recycling attempt was a failure, SpaceX still succeeded in delivering the payload. So you can discover some really cool things about your data using pivot tables. You do have to kind of explore them. It's going to be a little bit different depending on your data. It's very important to know your data intimately and to remember what your column labels refer to so that you can drag and drop them into the different quadrants, the different fields. Okay, so now that we're done with pivoting in sheet 1 and the pivot table sheet, we can move to VLookup. Both VLookup and HLookup help you in datasets look up a specific value and then either output it or further process it. We'll start with VLookup, and we have an example with salespeople who are making certain revenues for a hypothetical company. And above that, we have a commission chart based on sales in a certain range, what commission the company has said that they will pay. So we've got some examples here and the formula. So I'm going to click into cell C15 to start entering this. All formulas start with an equal sign. And the example in cell C12 is uppercase, but you can actually do lowercase too. Either way is fine. Open parenthesis with Shift 9. And as you're typing the formula, you see that Excel kind of leads you through the parameters, the variables that the formula needs. We need a value to look up, the table to look it up in, and what column index number to output, and an extra parameter that we're not going to use in this case. So the lookup value, we're going to look up the one right next to us in cell B15. We can click that or type that. Then we put a comma to say that we're ready to move on to the next piece of data. Then the table array. So the table we're looking that value up in is this table up here. We're going to drag this formula down after we're done with it. So we need to tell Excel, when we drag this formula down, the table that the values are looked up in doesn't move. To do that, we put $signs before the column letter and the row number in all parts of the reference to the table. So the table is from cell A3 to C8. So $A, $3, shift the key next to the L, to the right of the L, colon, and then the table ends in cell $C, $8. So you see that it has highlighted the correct area, comma. Now, when your piece of data has been looked up in that table, we need to tell it what column value to output. So we obviously don't want the ranges of the data itself in columns A and B. So we need that commission percentage, column C, to be output. Usually in computer science, the first entry of something is 0 and then 1 and 2. But for some odd reason, Excel made the first column be 1, then the second column 2 and 3. So we want column C to be output. We need to enter the number 3 as our column index number. The last option, the range lookup, is optional. So we will hit Shift 0 to enter a closed parenthesis and then enter. And just like that, you see that it outputted the correct answer. For Mr. Joe Michaels, he sold just under that minimum amount, so he only gets a 2% commission. Now if I click on this cell, I can drag that tiny fill handle down, and you see that it makes those same calculations correctly for the other people. Now we still haven't figured out exactly how much these people need to be paid. We can go into column D, and we can use this information in math. So we can say equals, and we need to do simply column B times column C. So we can click on column B, Shift 8 for multiplication symbol, click on column C, hit enter, and there you go. That would be the commission on top of an hourly or contractual wage. So I drag that down, and it figures out the payments for the other people. If you have a large group of salespeople, this could be really helpful. So that is VLookup. All right, after our standard example looking vertically through a table with VLookup, let's move from the VLookup table to HLookup. And this is quite a bit differently set up. We have a table of information about a hypothetical company. This table is way longer than it is tall. And what you could use this for is you can quickly pull up certain information, maybe the quantity of items purchased or the company cost versus the customer cost of a certain order ID number. So the HLookup is going to look horizontally through the table. And what you could do, you could wire this up to have the formula not change and just change the value in a different cell, like A7, for example, based on the different row to check which piece of data you want to be spit out. This is basically changing that 3 value that we put into the VLOOKUP formula to spit out the commission percentage. So in cell A15, we'll start our formula with an equal sign. And again, the examples have HLOOKUP in uppercase, but it can be lowercase as well. Open parenthesis, shift 9. So first we have to say what value we want to look up. And just like with the data that we are going to spit out, we can wire this formula up that the formula stays the same and we change that value somewhere else. So this formula is really fluid, and we put that in this example in cell A4. So we'll never have to change this. We'll just change the order ID number that we're curious about in cell A4 instead. So that's our lookup value. It's going to be a relative reference to that cell A4. Now, the table array refers to just the area of the table. So that is from cell D3 to, if we scroll over, to cell Y9. Now, we're not going to drag this formula anywhere else. We're not going to copy it. So it's okay that we have not put dollar symbols before the D, the 3, the Y, and the 9 to make this formula fixed. Now, the row index number, I'll scroll back, is that value that we're going to check that order for. So we just have to click on the cell A7, comma. Now, HLOOKUP has the parameter here at the end, the range lookup. If you want to have an approximate match, okay, then you can enter true. Or if the match has to be exact, you put in false. Now, this will basically vary depending on your confidence in the data set that has been outputted from a different database that you're processing in Excel. I'll put false and shift 0 to close parenthesis. So let's take a look, see if this value is correct. It's outputted 4,000. We're checking order number 1006 for the fourth row, the quantity. And sure enough, that is correct. So let's just do a little checking. Let's do 1017 for the company's cost in row 2 there. It says 1.7. Let's scroll over and take a look. That's correct. So it understands our data based on the way we set the formula up. We just figure out what row we care about in a situation, and then we say what customer order ID we're looking for. I'll do 7, and then it figures out for us. So that is HLOOKUP. So after HLOOKUP, let's take a look at one more exercise for working with our data. HLOOKUP required us to kind of wire up a couple different things together to process our data. But from the HLOOKUP tab, if we go to the second to last one, drop down lists, we might want to make sure that the data we're generating is really clean. We focused on analyzing existing data today, but we can use some Excel features to make sure that data we analyze later, as we are creating it, is really clean data. So in this tab, I've got a little, maybe you can use Excel as a log for a checking account or something like that. And we've got some transactions with different amounts. And maybe in the future, we're looking to analyze them based on the type of transaction, how much we're spending on entertainment and groceries, etc. we would have to label each piece of data to make that calculation possible. And we can do that with data validation and drop-down lists. So we're going to click first into cell E3. We are going to add a column to this table. This table is just like the table we made in the previous example. If you ever need to expand a table, you can just go to a column after it and type the column label. So in cell E3, I'll just do, I'll call it a category of expense and enter. So it expanded the table out. Now we need to create, basically what we're going to do is we're going to have a label in each of these cells. And if we were typing it manually, we could make typos. But we're going to wire these values up to steal from over here, where they're always spelled the same, so that there's no typos and our data is super clean. So we'll highlight cells E4 through E11, then go into our Data tab, and in the Data Tools list, you see there is a Data Validation menu. And there's some options. I'll just go into Data Validation. Under Settings in Data Validation, it is asking us for validation criteria. We basically only want to allow certain values. Right now it's allowing any value, so we can click into this drop-down. And there are some different things here. Maybe you only want whole numbers, or it has to be a decimal. Maybe you want a date or a time, something custom where you wrote a formula. But we want to allow values from a list, and that list will drop down with an arrow similar to the filter arrows. So I'll click List. It's got In-Cell drop-down. You could unclick that if you want to require it to manually be typed, but the drop-down is really helpful. Then the source. So it's expecting us to pick a range. I'll click this button to be able to highlight the range here. Click the down arrow button and click OK. So now when I click into cell E4, next to it appears drop-down label, and I can fill all of these out. So there you go. You're ready when you want to, when you're ready to write a custom formula to figure out how much money is being spent on certain categories, types of transactions. So we hope you've learned a lot from our Level 3 class on Microsoft Excel, focusing on data. If you're looking for more practice, we have an Excel pivot table practice table, which has a whole ton of data. This goes way down. And the data is fairly simple. So when you're making a pivot table, insert pivot table, you should be able to figure out fairly quickly how to use it. So thanks for watching this video on managing and using data in Microsoft Excel. Again, we've got the extra pivot table practice worksheet that you can use to get some more practice. Click into the table, hit Insert, Pivot Table, New Worksheet, OK. And it will start you off on a pivot table that you can work on. We've got all of our other examples. We removed duplicates from a longer list. We took the data in one column and made it two. We generated sparklines.
We worked in this large data set, filtering it, hiding data, making charts from it. We created a table, and we used conditional formatting to help make it easier to read. We made a pivot table, and we sliced and diced it a whole bunch of different ways. And we did VLookup and HLookup. So again, we hope you've learned a ton, and you can go to the library's website, lincolnwoodlibrary.org, for all of our other different services, resources, and we also have a whole bunch of events. You can see what we have going on, most of which are virtual. On our technology training page, you can see that Lincolnwood residents can set up 45 or hour-long appointments for individual technology help. And on our Quick Links page, under Research and Learning Quick Links, you can see links to all of our premium databases, including lynda.com, where you can log in with your library card number and a password to access their library of great technology training videos. They have videos that are hours long. They have multiple classes at multiple levels. You can watch individual videos or whole full-length classes. It's absolutely great. You can go to the library catalog to find books and movies and everything you want to check out. We have tons of books on Microsoft Excel and more. So thanks for watching this video. We hope you've learned a lot about Microsoft Excel.